Very lovely.
The famous Venus of Urbino, the picture more than any other that tourists have always come to see in the Uffizi.
She looks rather nicer than the Venus that I'm used to, and rather more real.
She looks much more real. She doesn't look like a Venus at all, apart from the fact that she's a naked woman. There's no Cupid, there's no mythological palace. There are 16th century women holding 16th century clothes in a 16th century room. While she's in the Urbino collection, she's always called the Naked Woman. And it seems to be the first major Euro painting which is just a female nude, lying on a bed, looking sexy.
Isn't there a Giorgione that's quite similar?
There is a Giorgione which, in fact, has got a figure in exactly the same pose, but she's asleep and she's in a landscape.
So there's no connection between the viewer and her?
There's none at all, no. I mean, you know, she's the goddess of love, whereas this woman has none of the attributes of the goddess of love.
How did other people respond to a painting like this? Would it have been considered indecent?
It would have been considered grossly indecent in the 16th century, and the only people who could, as it were, afford both financially and socially to own a painting of this kind were the very grand. If you're a duke or something, you're above the rules. But a picture like this would have been kept in your bedroom. The justification was that if the father, the husband, the future father, is more aroused when he's making love, you will make better children.
Great justification. Would you have painted her from life?
Well, I think he must have had a model in the studio, lying on a bed in that pose. We do know that Titian did use naked female models. He's the first artist in Europe who's known to have done so. And he used prostitutes for his models. He had to actually have the figure in front of him before he could paint it. And people say that when Titian was painting his models, whether male or female, he went into a kind of trance, that he was so deeply physically and mentally involved with them.
How involved with his models, we'll never know. But this mysterious woman, who was probably a courtesan, appears in several paintings by Titian. In fact, the Ferrarese ambassador complained that Titian exhausted himself making love to his models, though he denied it. Gorgeous though she was, what bothered me was that she looked rather boneless. And when you look at a model in this pose, her body does different things. Gravity takes its course, and muscles and bones behave in different ways. Is this a 16th century ideal?
It's very much a 16th century ideal. He's not an artist who paints literally from life. You're supposed at the time to improve on nature. That's why this figure is, in fact, quite clearly idealized in certain ways. I don't think, you know, any woman physically looked quite like that. But he starts off from a real person.
Okay, Dave.
Sometimes Renaissance painters would make do with their male apprentices to model the female form, just adding curves and bumps where appropriate.
Over there.
How's that looks?
Oh, it doesn't matter.
I wondered if this was the case with Ariadne. She's quite a muscular girl.
You're right, Dave. Is it torture?
Philippa was starting the most difficult part of the painting, the drapery. This gave her an opportunity to indulge in pure vermilion, as well as lashings of ultramarine from that precious lapis lazuli. White highlights helped create the folds of the drapery, but it looked rather flat. This is where one of the most difficult aspects of oil painting can make all the difference, if you get it right.
I'm going to use a red glaze, which is a translucent pigment, usually organic, sometimes from a plant, sometimes from beetles like these. These are cochineal beetles. And I can show just how lovely the colour is by putting the beetles in there and just pouring some boiling water over them, and immediately the dye comes out. So this is a lovely colour, really beautiful, good enough to drink. Used to be used as a food colouring and in makeup. But I can't use it just like that. It would be turned into a solid pigment that was mixed with different mediums. It could be thickened linseed oil, like this one. And it might be mixed with an even thicker oleoresinous substance called Venice turpentine, which is incredible, like treacle. The ingredients of the glaze medium has always been a bit of a mystery. The recipes perhaps were kept and passed down and, you know, don't tell anybody else. So I'm going to try and unravel it and make up my own mixture and see what happens.
Titian achieved the wonderful textural vibrancy and depth of colour so characteristic in his works by mastering the technique of glazing. Translucent colour is applied like varnish over thick layers of paint to enhance the folds of the drapery and the shadows of the flesh tones. Titian's student, Palmer the Younger, said through these many layers he gradually covered those quintessential forms with living flesh, bringing them by many stages to a state in which they lacked only the breath of life. Breathing life into paint is what Titian did best in his portraits, something I constantly strive for. While I was in Florence, Charles and I went to the Pitti Palace to see some of his paintings of the great and the good, in the hope that some of his magic might rub off. Titian made his reputation and much of his living by portraiture. It was this that provided his passport to the aristocratic and imperial patronage that he enjoyed. He was famed for his ability to approach each sitter afresh, revealing their character, laying bare their psychology. But Titian had help landing these lucrative commissions. His well-connected friend Pietro Aretino played a vital role in promoting the artist.
This is the man who really made Titian famous as a portraitist throughout Europe. He was a journalist and he published letters which were distributed all over Western Europe. And in those letters he kept saying that the great and good really need to be painted by Titian. Titian could immortalize them in a way that nobody else could do.
And this worked?
It worked brilliantly. At one point, Titian, in fact, was working for the two most powerful men in Europe, for the Emperor Charles V and for the Pope Paul III. There's never been any portraitist in history who's been so successful.
So he was a fantastic publicist.
He was a brilliant publicist. One of the astonishing things about the Aretino portrait is the extraordinary sense of animation and life that Titian's been able to give to him. And I've always wondered how a portrait painter keeps the interest of his sitter, because you've painted royalty, you've painted the great and good. They're not used to sitting there for hours and hours doing nothing.
It's incredibly difficult. I've had people, yes, fidgeting endlessly, opening newspapers over their face. In desperation, I've given them something to read. They open the newspaper over their face. I've also had people walk out screaming because they've gone sort of into a spiral of despair. And I'm afraid I find that very difficult. Unlike Titian, I think he was very good at that sort of thing.
He clearly must have been.
What makes the Aretino portrait even more alive is the looseness of the brushstrokes. In fact, Aretino made a joke that if the patron had paid Titian more money, it would have been more highly finished.